I read a story this week that was brilliant. It connects the dots from an untouched tribe in southern Africa all the way to a resistance group at one of the world's most profitable companies. This story completely reframed some of my strongest perspectives on the future of work. But it was really long. I had to keep flipping back and forth between other tasks, and actually a word count app tells me that it comes in at over 5% of the length of the first Harry Potter book. It was so good though that I decided to distill it down into this episode so you can get all of the core takeaways in just a few minutes of your time, and I promise you it'll be worth it. This is Out of Office, episode 14. So the story in question was by a writer called Cal Newport and published in the latest issue of The New Yorker. I'll put a link in the comments in case you want to read it. It begins in the northwest Kalahari Desert, which is somewhere around there. There's this tribe called the Juhawantsi, and they're one of the last hunter-gatherer communities in the world. They were the subject of one of the most famous anthropological studies in history when a guy called Richard Lee studied them in the 60s. This tribe lived in an area that's described as a marginal environment for human habitation. It had a lot of droughts, not many resources, you get the picture. So everyone had always assumed that without agriculture, the life of a hunter-gatherer would be a struggle for survival, especially someplace like the Kalahari Desert. But that's not what Lee found. Instead, he discovered that the adults only needed to spend 20 hours a week acquiring food, and their diet had more than enough calories for a comfortable life. This discovery defied everyone's expectations. How counterintuitive is it that this tribe with no access to easy food sources like farming or fishing, no markets to trade in, and certainly none of our modern conveniences, was somehow able to live a life with more leisure time than you or I have? Okay, but now here's where it gets really interesting. The writer shifts gear to apply these learnings to modern times. Earlier this year, Apple CEO Tim Cook faced a tough labor problem of a very different kind. After he announced his return to office plans, employees formed a renegade group called Apple Together, and they protested that their vision of the future of work was growing further and further apart from the executive team. They bemoaned time lost to commuting, the difficulty of achieving deep thought in distracting open offices, and being treated like school kids who need to be told when to be where and what homework to do. The employees who signed the letter were hoping to preserve their ability to work from home, but there's a more general principle at stake here, which is remarkably similar to the mistaken expectations that the Juhawantsi tribe disprove. Knowledge workers, which is to say, people that can do their job from a computer, were already exhausted before the pandemic arrived by an overload of meetings, emails, and never-ending to-do lists. And because we all worked in this way, there was a collective belief that it was somehow fundamental to having a professional job in the 21st century. But the pandemic called this assumption into question. If an activity as entrenched as coming into an office every day could be overturned overnight, what other aspects of our professional lives could be reimagined? The battle for remote work is a proxy for a deeper unrest. We need new ideas about how to reshape work, and anthropology has something to offer us. If you draw from Lee's research, a deep history of the human relationship to work can be reconstructed. We can identify the points where modern office life clearly differs from the types of work that dominated most of our species' history. And what we find is that the greatest pressure points, including all of the ones that Apple Together mentioned, form at the points where our modern jobs diverge furthest from our hunter-gatherer ancestors. And in this way, a roadmap starts to form. It becomes clear that remote work by itself isn't enough. That'll alleviate some of the symptoms, but it's just the tip of the iceberg for how some of the biggest problems of modern work can be solved with simple adjustments to the way we work. And let me be clear, this is not just about making workers happier. It's a win-win because it also removes the blockers that prevent them from doing their best work every single day. And that's what true productivity looks like. So here are 3 clear actions that every workplace can take to find that equilibrium for themselves. Number 1, for most of history, humanity has worked on one task at a time, which is why our brains are programmed to release endorphins when we complete a task. Contrast that with modern work, where we're all working towards dozens of parallel objectives, and every email or Zoom call is a small step to advance a large project that could take months or even years to complete. What's the solution? Managing task assignment via pull systems. That means you stop multitasking and you focus on one major objective at a time until you reach a stopping point. Then and only then do you pull another task from a centrally prioritized collection. This ultimately ends up breaking work into smaller chunks or units with a defined input or assignment brief and output or stopping point. This approach works really well for a wider variety of tasks than you would think. And when you get that rhythm of singular focus and sequential task completion right, it's familiar to the ancient part of our brains. It's truly astonishing how effective this method is at motivating high productivity at a team level. Number 2, we learn to work in 8 unbroken hours, which is why work emails bleeding into the evening has become such a pain point. By contrast, the work of hunter-gatherers has natural breakpoints while they wait for the heat of the day to pass or an animal to show up. And this contributes to the false assumption that someone who works long hours is better than someone who doesn't, when the reverse is often true. So, what's the solution? Stop infantilizing people. Clearly define the outputs that they need to produce and let them define the best way to schedule their week in order to achieve it. I have colleagues who work best when they take a break after every hour, and I have others who work best in 15-hour bursts of inspired hyperfocus, and then need to sleep it off. The point is, everyone is different, and the rigidity of 9-to-5 office jobs fails to get the best out of most people. When the 9-to-5 workday became standard, almost nobody could do their jobs asynchronously, and it was almost impossible to measure the productivity of a knowledge worker in any way besides how many hours they were putting in. But that's not been true for over a decade, and it's time companies realize that this misconception is holding them back from getting the best out of their people. Which brings us to number 3. I used to have a colleague with a rainy day list pinned to her wall. She had big dreams of completing chunky projects that would really add value, but somewhat inevitably, her day-to-day priorities ended up getting in the way. And when she resigned, you can guess how many things she ticked off that rainy day list. 0. When people aren't delivering big projects, it doesn't mean that they don't have the skill or the will. It means that the structure of their work bogs them down with day-to-day priorities, putting out fires and writing endless project updates without ever having time to innovate or ideate. How do we fix that? Company-wide respect for deep focus time, where workers block themselves off to give uninterrupted focus to an important task. This is proven to be incredibly powerful, but it only works if everyone is trained not to expect immediate responses to chats. And also when there are rock-solid playbooks and written updates so people can unblock their own work without needing to bug someone else for answers in real time. So there you have it. 3 practical tips that anyone can apply to thrive in a difficult environment, whether that's the Kalahari Desert or a modern office job. I'm Andrew Allen, and the future of work is out of office.